The cold wasn't just in the air, it was in her bones. Isabella couldn't feel her fingers against the steering wheel anymore. The luxury sedan, now just a buried metal coffin in a snowbank, was rapidly disappearing under the relentless Wyoming whiteout. She closed her eyes, the tears freezing on her lashes, accepting that this was how it ended. Alone, frozen, forgotten. Suddenly, a sound cut through the howling wind. A heavy thud, then another. A shadow eclipsed the white snow. It was massive, breathing steam into the frigid air. A horse, and riding it a man who looked like he was carved from the mountain itself, and his mounted block in the wind. And for the first time in hours, Isabella saw hope. The silence of a luxury car is usually a selling point. In the showroom, the salesman tells you how it shuts out the noise of the city, how it creates a sanctuary of peace. But here, on a forgotten backroad in the deep wilderness of Wyoming, the silence was terrifying. Isabella gripped the leather steering wheel, her knuckles white, her manicured nails digging into the material. The digital dashboard had gone dark 20 minutes ago. The engine, which had hummed so smoothly when she left the private airfield in Jackson Hole, was now dead. Outside, the world had vanished. There was no sky, no ground, no horizon. There was only white, a swirling, violent, angry white that slammed against the glass with a fury she had never witnessed in her 32 years of life. She checked her phone for the 100th time. No signal. Just a black screen reflecting her own terrified eyes. "Stupid," she whispered, her voice trembling. "So stupid." She was Isabella Vance. The Isabella Vance, CEO of Vance Media. She didn't make mistakes. She calculated risks. She merged companies. She dominated boardrooms in Manhattan, but she had made a mistake today. A fatal one. Impatience. That was her sin. The main highway had been backed up due to weather warnings, and she had looked at the GPS, seen a shortcut through the mountain pass, and taken it. She thought she could outsmart nature. She thought her expensive all-wheel drive car could handle a little snow. She didn't know that a little snow in Wyoming meant a blizzard that could bury a house in an hour. The temperature inside the car was dropping rapidly. She could see her breath, now puffing out in little gray clouds. She was wearing a silk blouse, a tailored blazer, and thin dress slacks. Her coat was a fashionable trench meant for dashing from a limo to a restaurant, not for surviving sub-zero temperatures. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to preserve whatever heat remained. Her feet were already numb in her high-heeled boots. Time lost its meaning. Was it minutes? Hours? The wind outside shrieked like a banshee, rocking the heavy car. Snow was piling up against the windows, darkening the interior. It felt like being buried alive. Isabella closed her eyes. Images of her office flashed in her mind. The view of Central Park. The unfinished coffee on her desk. The merger contracts waiting for her signature. It all seemed so small now, so incredibly meaningless. If she died here, the company would go on. The stocks would fluctuate. Someone else would sit in her chair. But she would be gone. Her shivering became violent, uncontrollably shaking her entire body. Then it stopped. A strange warmth began to spread through her limbs. She knew, from reading survival articles she'd once scoffed at, that this was a bad sign. It was the end. Her eyelids grew heavy. She let her head rest against the freezing window. Just a nap, she thought deliriously. Just a little sleep. Thump. The sound was dull, muffled by the snow, but it was distinct. It wasn't the wind. Thump. Isabella forced her eyes open. It took every ounce of willpower. Through the sliver of glass that wasn't covered in snow, she saw a shape. Dark, towering. A horse. A massive black beast wading through chest-deep snow as if it were water. And on its back, a figure. A man in a heavy duster coat, a cowboy hat pulled low, his face wrapped in a scarf. He pulled the horse upright beside her door. It looked huge. He swung his leg over the saddle and dropped into the snow, sinking up to his thighs. Isabella couldn't move. She could only watch as a gloved hand wiped the snow from her window. Blue eyes, sharp and intense, peered in. He tried the handle. Locked. The electronics were dead. He didn't panic. He didn't yell. He simply reached into his coat, pulled out a heavy tool, and smashed the rear window. The sound of shattering glass was explosive. The wind roared into the car instantly, stealing the last of the heat. The man reached in, unlocked the driver's door, and wrenched it open. "Can you walk?" he shouted over the wind. His voice was deep, gravelly. Isabella tried to nod, but her head just lolled. "All right," he said. It wasn't a question. He reached in and unbuckled her seatbelt. He grabbed her with surprising ease, lifting her out of the car as if she weighed nothing. The shock of the outside air hit her like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. He didn't stop. He carried her to the horse. He pulled a thick, heavy wool blanket from his saddlebag and wrapped it around her, covering her head, her face, her body. "Hold on to the horn," he commanded, lifting her up onto the saddle. "Do not let go." Isabella gripped the leather pommel. She couldn't feel it, but she locked her frozen fingers around it. The man didn't get on behind her. The snow was too deep for the horse to carry double comfortably. He grabbed the reins and began to walk, leading the horse, breaking the path with his own body. Isabella watched him through a gap in the blanket. He was trudging through snow that was waist-deep in places, head bowed against the wind, fighting every step of the way to save her. She didn't know his name. She didn't know where they were going, but as the horse followed the man into the white void, she knew one thing. She was safe. The journey was a blur of white and gray. The rhythm of the horse's gait was the only thing keeping Isabella conscious. She drifted in and out, her mind playing tricks on her. She thought she saw taxicabs. She thought she heard the subway. But then the wind changed. The howling lessened. They had entered a tree line. The massive pines blocked the worst of the blizzard. Through the darkness, a light appeared. It wasn't the harsh lead glare of the city. It was a warm, yellow glow. A lantern. A cabin emerged from the storm. It was built of heavy logs, sturdy and low to the ground. Smoke poured from a stone chimney, whisked away instantly by the wind. The man led the horse to a small overhang attached to a barn. He tied the reins and immediately reached up for Isabella. "I've got you," he said. He pulled her down into his arms. Her legs gave way instantly, totally numb. "Ecohet." Scooped her up again and carried her toward the cabin. He kicked the door open. The warmth hit them like a wall. The smell of burning pine, old leather, and coffee enveloped her. It was the best thing she had ever smelled. He kicked the door shut behind them, sealing out the storm. The silence returned, but this time it was a peaceful silence. The crackling of the fire was the only sound. He carried her to a large leather armchair in front of the massive stone fireplace. He set her down gently. "My name is Colt," he said, pulling the scarf from his face. He was ... rugged. That was the only word. He had a few days of stubble on a square jaw. His skin was tanned and weathered by the sun and wind. His eyes were the color of the Wyoming sky, piercing, clear blue. He wasn't handsome in the way the men in New York were handsome. He didn't look polished. He looked like he was built to endure. "Isabella," she stammered, her teeth chattering so hard it hurt. "Don't talk yet, Isabella. You're hypothermic. We need to get you warm. He moved with efficiency. He didn't ask permission. He just did what was necessary. He took her frozen hands and rubbed them briskly. Then he looked at her soaked, thin clothes. You need to get those off, he said plainly. They're wet and they're freezing you. He turned his back, walking to a wooden chest at the foot of a bed in the corner. He pulled out a thick flannel shirt and a pair of heavy wool socks. He tossed them onto the chair next to her. I'll go check on the horse. Change. Put those on. Wrap yourself in the quilt. He didn't wait for a response. He put his hat back on and went back out into the storm. Isabella struggled. Her fingers were clumsy blocks of wood. It took her 5 minutes just to undo the buttons of her blouse. She was shaking violently, but she managed. She stripped off the expensive designer clothes that had offered her no protection and pulled on the flannel shirt. It was enormous on her. It smelled like cedar and rain. It hung down to her knees. She pulled on the thick socks and curled up in the chair, pulling the heavy patchwork quilt up to her chin. She stared at the fire. The flames danced and licked at the logs. The door opened again. A gust of cold air, then silence. Colt stomped the snow off his boots. He hung his coat on a peg. He walked over to the fire and added another log. He didn't look at her. He went to a small kitchenette in the corner and poured something steaming into a mug. He walked back and pressed the mug into her hands. Drink, he said. It's broth. It'll help. Isabella took a sip. It was salty and hot. It tasted like life. Thank you, she whispered. Colt sat down on the stone hearth, facing her. He rested his elbows on his knees. He looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time, you're lucky, Isabella, he said, his voice low. Another hour out there, and I would have been digging you out come spring. I know, she said, looking down into the mug. I took a shortcut. Colt let out a short, dry laugh. There are no shortcuts in Wyoming. Only long ways and dead ends. I have, too. I have to call my office, she said, the habit of her old life kicking in automatically. They'll be worried. Colt pointed to the window, where the snow was piled halfway up the glass. Phone lines are down. Cell towers are frozen over. The road to town is under 6 feet of snow. No one is going anywhere for at least 3 days. Isabella felt a rise of panic. 3 days. I can't stay here for 3 days. I have a merger. I have a life. Colt stood up. He loomed over her, not threateningly, but with the presence of a man who knew exactly who he was and where he stood. Your life right now is staying alive, he said. The merger can wait. The storm doesn't care about your schedule. He walked to the window and looked out at the white darkness. You're stuck with me, city girl. Best settle in. The first day passed in a haze of sleep. Isabella's body was exhausted from the trauma. She slept in the armchair, then moved to the bed Colt insisted she'd take while he slept on the rug by the fire. When she woke on the morning of the second day, the storm was still raging, but the cabin felt different. It felt safe. She watched Colt. He was a man of few words, but constant motion. He was up before dawn. She heard him chopping wood outside on the porch. She watched him melt snow for water. She watched him oil his leather tack by the firelight. There was a rhythm to his life that was completely alien to her. In New York, everything was frantic, rushing to the next meeting, to next call, the next crisis. Here, everything was deliberate. You chopped wood so you didn't freeze. You cooked food so you didn't starve. Cause and effect. Simple. By the afternoon, she felt strong enough to walk around. The cabin was small but beautiful. 1 room, mostly. A kitchen, a sleeping area, the living space. The walls were lined with bookshelves. She pulled a book down. The collected poems of Robert Frost. "You read poetry?" she asked, surprised. Colt was stirring a stew in a cast iron pot over the fire. He didn't turn around. "Gets quiet out here. Books don't talk back." "Do you live here alone?" she asked. "Mostly," he said. "No family." He paused. The spoon stopped moving in the pot. The silence stretched thin. "Used to," he said finally. "My wife, she passed 5 years ago." Isabella felt a pang of guilt for asking. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry." Colt turned to her. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were softer than before. "It's fine. It's just been a long time since I said it out loud." He ladled stew into a bowl and handed it to her. "Eat." They sat by the fire. The awkwardness of the first night began to fade. Isabella told him about New York. She tried to explain what a hedge fund was, and he listened, though she suspected he found it ridiculous. "So," Colt said, tearing a piece of bread, "you move numbers around on a screen, and that makes you rich." "It's more complicated than that," she laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in. She couldn't remember how long. "We create value." "Value," Colt mused. He gestured to the fire. "This would... I cut it. I split it. Now it keeps us warm. That's value. I raise cattle. They feed people. That's value. Your numbers, they seem like a ghost story." Isabella wanted to argue, but she looked at the fire, then at the sturdy walls of the cabin. She looked at Colt, strong and capable. "Maybe you're right," she admitted softly. The storm broke on the evening of the third day. The wind died down. The clouds parted to reveal a moon so bright it illuminated the white landscape like daylight. Colt stood up. "Come here," he said. "You need to see this." He opened the door. The air was crisp and painfully cold, but the view was breathtaking. The mountains rose up like silver giants against the starry sky. The snow sparkled like millions of diamonds. It was a silence so profound it felt holy. Isabella stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in the quilt. She stood next to Colt. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It is," Colt said. He wasn't looking at the mountains. He was looking at her. The moonlight caught her face, softening the sharp angles of her worry, making her look younger, freer. Isabella turned and caught his gaze. The air between them suddenly felt charged, hotter than the fire inside. He took a step closer. She didn't retreat. She found herself leaning in. The isolation, the rescue, the intimacy of the small cabinet was all culminating in this moment. His hand came up, hovering near her face. His rough fingers grazed her cheek. She closed her eyes, her breath hitching. "Isabella," he murmured. They were inches apart. She could feel the heat radiating off him. She wanted him to kiss her. She wanted to forget New York and the merger and the loneliness of her penthouse. But then a sound broke the spell. A low rumble in the distance. Getting louder, Colt pulled back instantly, his face hardening. He looked toward the valley. "Plows," he said, his voice flat. "They're clearing the pass." The moment shattered. The real world was coming back. The next morning, the sound of an engine roared up the driveway, a massive county snowplow, followed by a sheriff's SUV. The rescue had arrived. Isabella stood in the center of the cabin, dressed back in her dried, wrinkled city clothes. They felt stiff and foreign now. The flannel shirt lay folded neatly on the bed. The sheriff knocked on the door. "Hello? Anyone in there?" Colt opened the door. "We're here, Sheriff." "Colt! Good to see you, son." "We found a car buried down the pass. Plates came back to a fancy rental. Figured if anyone survived, they'd head for your lights. "She's here," Colt said. He stepped aside. Isabella walked to the door. "I'm here." "Ma'am," the sheriff tipped his hat, "we got an ambulance waiting down the road. Just in case. And we can get you to a hotel in Jackson." It was over. The bubble had popped. Isabella turned to Colt. He was standing by the fireplace, his hands in his pockets, looking at the floor. He looked unreachable again. The walls were back up. "Colt," she said. He looked up. His eyes were guarded. Thank you," she said. It felt like such a small word for saving her life. "Just did what anyone would do," he said. "No." She shook her head. "You did more than that." She waited. She waited for him to ask her to stay. She waited for him to say that the Ulmer skis on the porch meant something. But Colt looked at her expensive coat, her boots, her posture. He saw the CEO of Vance Media. He didn't see the woman in his flannel shirt. "You should go," he said quietly. "Your world is waiting. They're probably worried about their money." The sting of his words hurt more than the cold. He was pushing her away. He was deciding for her that she didn't belong here. "Goodbye, Colt," she said, her voice choking. "Safe travels, Isabella." She walked out the door. She got into the sheriff's SUV. She didn't look back. If she had, she would have seen Colt standing in the doorway, watching the car disappear around the bend, his hand resting on the doorframe where she had just been standing. New York City was loud. That was the first thing Isabella noticed when she returned. It wasn't a hum. It was a scream. Sirens, horns, jackhammers, shouting. It was an assault on the senses. She closed the merger. It was the biggest deal of her career. The board applauded. Her face was on the cover of Forbes, the unstoppable Isabella Vance. She sat in her corner office, 50 floors up. The view was magnificent steel and glass and ambition. But she felt hollow. She looked at the coffee in her hand. It was from the most expensive cafe in the city, but it tasted like burnt water compared to the Cowboy coffee Colt had brewed in a dented pot. She went to high-end. Gallus men in tuxedos flirted with her. They talked about stocks, about summer homes in the Hamptons, about their new cars. Isabella would smile, nod, and drift away. All she could hear was Colt's voice. "There are no shortcuts." She started sleeping with the window open, even in the winter, just to feel the cold air. She bought a flannel shirt that she wore only on weekends when she was alone in her apartment. 3 months passed. Isabella was sitting in a board meeting. The CFO was droning on about quarterly projections. "If we cut the operational costs by 12%, we can increase the shareholder dividend by ... Isabella stopped listening. She looked out the window. It was raining. A cold, miserable rain. She remembered the fire. She remembered the silence. She remembered the feeling of being safe. She realized suddenly, with terrifying clarity, that she wasn't happy. She was successful, but she wasn't happy. She was rich, but she was poor in everything that mattered. She looked at the CFO. "Stop!" The room went silent. "I don't care about the dividend," she said. "Excuse me." The CFO blinked. Isabella stood up. She felt a weight lifting off her shoulders, a weight she had carried for 10 years. "I'm resigning," she said. "Isabella, you can't be serious," the chairman gasped. "You are the company." "No," she smiled, and for the first time in months, the smile reached her eyes. "I'm just a person, and I'm going home." The Wyoming spring was different from the winter. The white was gone, replaced by a vibrant, exploding green. The mountains were still capped with snow, but the valleys were alive with wildflowers. A sturdy 4x4 truck, not a sedan, this time kicked up dust on the long dirt road leading to the ranch. Isabella drove with the windows down. The air smelled of sagebrush and warming earth. She wasn't wearing a suit. She was wearing jeans and boots. Her hair was loose. She pulled up to the cabin. It looked exactly the same, yet even more beautiful in the sunlight. There was no one on the porch. The barn door was open. Isabella got out. She walked toward the barn. She heard the sound of a hammer ringing against metal. She stepped into the cool shade of the barn. Colt was there. He was shoeing the black horse, Midnight. His back was to her. He wore a t-shirt now, his muscles flexing as he worked. He paused. He didn't turn around. The animals always sensed it first, and the horse nudged him. Colt slowly set the hammer down. He turned around. He saw her standing in the doorway, framed by the spring sunlight. He froze. He blinked, as if he were seeing a ghost. "Isabella?" "Hi, Colt," she said. He wiped his hands on a rag, walking slowly toward her. He looked older, tired. His eyes were wary. "Your car break down again?" he asked, but there was no bite in the joke. "Just hope." "No," she said. "I bought a truck, a reliable one." "Just passing through?" he asked, stopping 3 feet away. Isabella shook her head. "No. I quit. You quit. The job, the city, the noise. He quit it all." Colt stared at her. "Why?" "Because—" She took a step closer, closing the gap. "I realized I left something here, something I couldn't live without." Colt's chest heaved. The walls he had built around his heart crumbled in an instant. "I thought I'd never see you again," he admitted, his voice rough. "I thought you belonged to the city." "I thought so too," she whispered. "But the city doesn't have a soul, and it doesn't have you." Colt didn't wait this time. He didn't hesitate. He reached out and pulled her to him. It wasn't like the gentle rescue in the snow. This was fierce. He buried his face in her hair, breathing her in. "Welcome home, Isabella," he said. "Ekiseth er." It was a kiss that tasted of dust and sunshine and forever. Outside, the wind blew through the pines, but it was a gentle wind now. A song, not a scream. Isabella wrapped her arms around the rancher's neck. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. She wasn't the CEO. She wasn't the victim.